Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today we're looking at first issue special number 2. This is from 1975 by DC Comics. And this one introduces us to the Green Team. This is a group of boy millionaires. And they're all, I don't know, around 12-ish. So we got the Commodore, who's a shipping tycoon. We got J.P. Houston, an oil magnate with his 6 guns. Then we have Cecil Sunbeam, the Star Maker. And the newest addition who joins the group in this issue is Abdul. He's a shoeshine who mistakenly gets a bunch of money from the bank, and then he makes a bunch of money on the stock market on some nonsense, and the bank gets their money back, and he becomes a millionaire and joins the Boy Millionaires. And this has to be one of the dumbest comic books I have ever read. Not only was it incredibly infantilizing, all of the characters are walking stereotypes. Of course, the oil magnate, whose last name, of course, is Houston, talks like partner and says all these cliche things and shoots things with his 6 guns. The Commodore's a stuck up boat guy, and Cecil Sunbeam talks like some weird hippie. It's horrible dialogue, even for the 70s, but it's so convoluted. The story makes almost no sense. These kids invest in adventure, but they don't really go on any adventures. They just sort of talk about adventures. So it's a really boring read, and it feels very contrived and very forced. Like somebody's on a deadline and they had to squirt this mess out. So now I know you're thinking, well, who did this? Well, believe it or not, it was Joe Simon and Jerry Grandetti. I don't know who this Grandetti, I can't pronounce that, is off the top of my head, but of course, Joe Simon, most listeners will recognize that name. So it's really shocking that Joe Simon did this because it is obviously aimed at younger audiences, but is an incredibly poorly written piece of work. It was clearly done just because they wanted to introduce some new characters and aim at a younger audience. But the action is boring and pretty lame. The premise is ludicrous. Much like Prez, which also came out at the same time, where an 18-year-old gets elected president, and it's sort of hippie nonsense. This is kind of along those lines. It's got this real corny, dated feel. And if you're looking for some real bad 70s stuff, this is definitely up in the ballpark. But this is just awful. The art's fine, actually. The art's okay, but everybody's drawn in these weird stereotypes, and the dialogue is worse than a stereotype. It's dated for its time, so I can see why this one never really caught on. I know they did reboot this a few years back, I think in 2016, to try and bring back the Green Team, and it only lasted a few issues. But they actually included like a female character in that one. I'll try and track one down to read. But this one is just completely stupid. It's 4 rich boys that just go around buying things. It's like Richie Rich, but less over less over the top humor and more kind of low end, low brow attempts at jokes. Like it's definitely written by somebody that's older and like middle age. They can't relate to kids well, and probably didn't have any kids or had kids that were much older than this. So the dialogue is incredibly rigid. They don't sound like kids even for the 70s. They're just walking cliches. So this one was a real big miss for me. I have to say this is just easily one of the dumbest things I've ever read. So if you're looking for something to read that is just awful, then yeah, then the Green Team is definitely your mark. But this is first issue special number 1, which introduces the Green Team. Uh, First issue special issue 2, I should say. I'm sorry, from 1975, the Green Team Boy Millionaires. You can find a copy for a couple bucks. It's not worth much. Um, I'm kind of surprised it's worth anything, honestly, but I definitely won't pay $2 for it that people are trying to get. It's more of a 50-cent bin. Very forgettable story, very forgettable characters. Probably best to be forgotten in DC's archives. But that'll do it for this one. To see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.